Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms. And of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Juliet, it's so nice to meet you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you. So it's here early November 2024, and I think we're a week or two on the heels of your new album that was released. So congratulations on that. And we'll get into some of the songs and stuff, but I know it's been a minute since you released music. I guess what was different about this time around than your previous releases, which were a number of years ago?
Yeah, gosh, it feels like everything was different. Because as you said, yeah, my last two full-length albums that I released were in 2005, which was my debut album, and 2007, which was the follow-up, my sophomore album. And then after that, I sort of stepped away from music for a really long time. And so I often think back to, the mid 2000s, and like social media wasn't really even a thing then. I think it was sort of the early days of MySpace. So we had that as a tool, but
Right.
YouTube was just coming out. Twitter, I think maybe came out after that. So it was just like all of the kind of promotional tools that we had at our disposal back then are completely different now. I will say it was a simpler time in that I didn't have to feel like I had to be a content creator every single second of every single day. It was a more pure time a little bit where you could actually focus on just the music and not everything else. But obviously, thinking about how to release music today, it's like there's so much self-promotion, there's so much you can do as an independent artist that we couldn't do back then, but I think it's a double-edged sword in some ways.
Right. Yeah, it feels like the whole environment right now with the streaming and everything, it's democratized music. So I think it feels like there's more access,
Yeah.
but then none of the numbers make sense, and the monetization aspect it sounds like a disaster. So yeah, I guess it is a double-edged sword for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, and it's it's kind of crowded the landscape too, so that, the bar is so low, everybody can put music out, but then I've often felt over the past, few months of trying to promote this thing that you're like screaming into the void, right? Because there's just so much other stuff out there, and algorithms change every day, and I feel like I'm constantly trying to like figure out what has changed and what's going to work today that didn't work yesterday or vice versa. So yeah, it's a
Right.
lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even I'm not comparing what I do with this podcast to making beautiful music, but yeah, the echo chamber, like, sometimes I'm like, I'm not talking to anybody right now because there's so many podcasts that are out there. And then I heard a stat actually last week about music. I think the number was on Spotify alone. Every single day, there's 75,000 songs uploaded.
Yeah,
Is it-
I think I heard it was like a million every day, so I prefer your figure. Your figure
Whatever it
gives
is, if
us a little bit of hope.
it's more than 10. That's a lot,
Yeah,
it's a lot from your standpoint, which is like, how do I get my music in front of the right people? Because it's just the options are just so many. So yeah,
yeah.
I totally respect that position. So for the last few years, I'm actually curious about what you were doing. Was it public relations? Was that what it is?
It was kind of public relations adjacent. Yeah, I went back to school when I stepped away from music, and I got a graduate degree in communications, and then I ended up in the DC area
Okay.
doing, yeah, sort of digital strategy and research and communications strategy consulting. So it's kind of a little bit. It's a very DC job, I tell people.
All right. Well, he's not a diplomat or an ambassador. So that's good.
Or a lobbyist.
Yeah, a lobbyist. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I think few of the conversations that I've had, I'm just fascinated because I respect musicians so much for a million reasons, right? It's putting the emotions out there for the people to interpret and translate. It's the hustle. It's the creative side. It's all those things, and it's wearing the multiple hats. But this whole question about do I or don't I with a full time music career? I mean, you've kind of gone through the whole emotional and mental journey of that, right? Having left
Yeah.
a few years ago, because I think I've read where you kind of felt burned out, and then but now you're back. I guess, yeah. Talk me through that, and can you do both? Can you have like a day job and then kind of with a little music on the side, or do you have to kind of go all in?
Yeah. I think it's possible to do both. I think for me, I always kind of think about it like a pendulum, right? And in my career, when I first graduated from college, I got a degree in economics. And so I got that degree and I realized, there's this kind of pull towards music. I don't want to work in finance. I don't want to go to law school. I think there's something there with music, right? And that's when I first started writing songs and released the first couple of albums. And then, like you said, burnout was really tough. I just sort of felt like as an independent musician, there were certain doors that I was not going to be able to kick down myself. And having had more of a traditional academic background and having sort of the left brain, right brain sides of myself being kind of equal, there was this question that kept popping up for me, which was like what is success on the music side? And am I happy with that definition, or can I find more kind of traditional success with more of a traditional job? And so ultimately, that was kind of what I was struggling with when I made the decision to walk away from music. And it's funny because when I walked away, I didn't really perform much. Maybe for about the 10 years before coming back to it later on,
Hmm.
I maybe played once every few months and I didn't write at all. And I think a lot of that was because working a full-time job, you just kind of feel tapped out at the end of the day. And, for me, trying to carve out the time to be creative or, to even kind of scratch that creative itch when you're at a day job all the time and working in communications, I sometimes had to be creative. And so by the time I was done, I had nothing left. And so for me, like, going through the pandemic in 2020 and 2021 was really having the space of like not having to commute, having more of a flexible work schedule,
Right.
kind of reawakened for me a little bit of the, hey, there's still something there. I kind of feel like I still have something to say and I have the time and space to really think about it because I'm not like sitting in DC traffic for hours on end. And so, yeah, then I started to do both for a little while.
Okay.
I was working my full-time job and I started to play out a lot again. Once venues started reopening after the pandemic, I was playing multiple times a weekend, sometimes on weeknights also, which, while we were still working remotely, it was easier to kind
Mm.
of, you make up the time and you work a little bit extra and still go play your gig and you come in the next day on Zoom. But it was really hard. And I was starting to see momentum build on the music side.
Mm.
And having worked, a traditional job for about a decade or so, I think I was in the position where it's like, I'm ready to place a bet on music. And I have the cushions of, having savings that I can, dip into if I need to. And kind of going where the energy is. And for me,
Okay.
the energy was in music and feeling like I had, something to say. And I had opportunity again. People were calling me to do stuff. And so I
Awesome.
wanted to just lean into that. Yeah.
Awesome.
But to your original question, I think it is possible to do both. And I
Yeah.
think, for me, it's really finding that balance of like, how do you really define success and where do you get your satisfaction from? And sometimes, that is being able to do music on the side as a hobby because you're fulfilled professionally by doing something else or vice versa.
Right. Well, I think I've seen in another interview that you said that you get a lot of joy and satisfaction from having people relate. And what's interesting is I'm listening to the music. I can't tell if you're completely angry or if you're grieving or if you're sad or if you're like, kind of F you kind of thing. And I'm not sure who you're saying all that to, if it's the ex or if
Yeah.
it's other people. So it's a
Or to myself.
or to
Yeah.
yourself, yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
stew of emotion. Is that the state of your being the last few years, and that's you've kind of captured that?
It is for sure. Yeah. I went through a divorce in 2019, so right before the pandemic. And back then I wasn't really writing. I hadn't started to really get back into songwriting until about 2021. And so I think that was actually a good thing for me because it gave me time to reflect on everything. And like you said, there's a lot of and that I still don't fully understand. And I think for me, this album that I've jokingly referred to this as like my divorce album, right? Because a lot of the themes are ending a relationship and the questions and decisions that come with that, and then all the way through finding love or finding a new relationship again and all the complexity and the weird feelings that come with that as well. And so, where earlier in my career as a songwriter, I think I kind of wrote about stuff that I didn't really understand myself. I sort of wrote, like, this is what I think the song should sound like, but maybe it wasn't quite as based in personal experience or personal details. Whereas I think pretty much every single song on this album, there's a personal nugget in there, whether or not, some of them I embellish a little bit for dramatic effect or humorous effect, but there's like a kernel of like
Right.
real personal truth, good, bad, and ugly in all of them. And yeah, like
Okay.
you said, it's kind of it's a stew of a lot of different kinds of emotions.
Right. And just for the record, though, I think I've seen where the song, so the album's called Carnival. It's out October
Yes.
25th. People can listen to it now, full
Mhm.
throttle, which is great. There's two songs I think that are kind of like side A, side B. So Pretty and then Call Your
Mhm.
Wife. But that has really
Yeah.
nothing to do with your ex-husband, does it? That's like a different thing.
Nope,
Right?
not at all. But
So yeah, could you
much,
clarify?
much older relationship.
Yeah, could you, yeah, that was an older relationship. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It was
tell us that
a
story.
relationship. Yeah, it's so interesting because it's also an older relationship that I think is one of my very first relationships when I was in college, much, much younger, and really didn't think about it, didn't talk about it, didn't wanna have anything to do with it for, about the 20 years since then. Um, and when I was kind of delving back into songwriting, I think for me, that song, for Pretty specifically, and then I'll tell you about the second one. Pretty was, I think, therapeutic in a way because it was really my first chance to kind of process the the kind of lingering guilt and shame that I felt about that relationship that really wasn't my fault. And so that song is really about thinking like, wait a second, all of these feelings that I've carried with me for all this time, like why was I doing that? And so that, that song, it's interesting because it's equal parts kind of looking at the both halves of the relationship, right? And really it's more about like, why did I let myself feel those things in the moment and also for the past 20 years, right? What was I thinking? Um, and so, yeah, so I released that song as a single in April. So I guess it's about 6 months ago now. And it was lead off single for the album. We were still in the process of recording and finishing the full album because we did it sort of slowly over a matter of a number of different months. And so the album wasn't quite done. And a couple of weeks after that song came out, I got a text message in the middle of the night. It was a number that I didn't recognize. And it basically just said, "Hey, I wanted to ask you about the guy in this new song that you wrote because I don't think that you're being fair." And, you kind of think, well, there's probably not that many people in the entire world that would have sent that message. And I didn't respond to it, but it like just dredged up all of those feelings from years and years ago of like just feeling like, okay, am I remembering something differently or like what? Like, wait, what? And I felt really weird for a couple days, and then it sort of morphed into anger of like, how dare you? And also, how dare you like send something in the middle of the night and like all of that. So, yeah, we weren't done with the album yet, and so I went into the studio the next week and had this idea for the song called "Call Your Wife." That it's funny because people hear the title and they assume that it's about
Right.
something. Like, no, 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 it's not that at all,
Right.
right? Um, and so, yeah, we finished that song pretty quickly, and it was the last one that we recorded for the album. It's also funny because the album was basically done at that point. We also were able to tap into some of the sort of dark carnival
Mm.
sounds. It's the song on the album that it's called Carnival, but the that's Call Your Wife is the song on the album that I think probably sounds the most sort of demented carnival-esque. And we did a video that accompanied it that had a lot of really fun kind of dark carnival imagery associated with it. So it was a nice bookend for the project.
Yeah, and even though you didn't respond to the text, this is your response, and so it's
Yes.
like thoughts and prayers to that poor soul because I had the lyrics up here. It's like, does she know you got drunk and started to wonder and looked up my number 3 weeks ago? You never admitted the damage you did, so you got mad. That pretty cut straight to the bone. You say I'm being unfair. If you're so innocent, why are you scared? I mean, it's like,
There's
okay, that's a good response.
there's a lot of like verbatim language in there. I think that it's funny too, like the second verse, there's a lot of stuff in there that probably most people won't understand.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like references that are very specific that, one person will understand.
Okay. Well, again, thoughts and prayers to that poor guy. Didn't know what he was asking for when he hit you up in the middle of the night. But then obviously you said this is, considered your divorce album. I guess the song that I'd love to ask you about is called Sorry Now, which the symbolism around, splitting assets and belongings and things like that. I think that, that was really powerful. But then I've also heard that that whole breakup was pretty amicable. And
Yeah.
I guess your perspective is different in the moment than it is 2 or 3 or 4 years later, right? In terms of like
Yeah.
who's responsible, what the accountability was. I guess
Yeah.
have you reflected on that a lot?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's exactly where that song came from because I didn't write it for a few years afterward, and I was kind of thinking back on what I remember about that experience, and it was really interesting that the most like visceral memories that I have are of the kind of the sadness of the dividing of the stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like sorting everything into two piles, and it's so interesting to me that that's just sort of the my memory of that time more so than anything else, and it's a sad, it's a sad memory. And yeah, a lot of times when I play this song live, it's one of the ones that gets the most emotional response out of people. You get
right,
people coming up and saying like, I just wept through that entire song. And on the one hand, it's like that, you as an artist, like you want people to really be able to connect to the material, but I always feel like I need to apologize. Like, I'm really sorry that you can relate to that to such a strong degree, right? Because you don't want anybody to go through anything like that. But
right,
um, yeah, I always found too, I really liked, I had the idea for that song. It was one of those songs that really came out really quickly. Like some you struggle with and you come back and you revisit and you revise. And that one, it was basically like I sat down and I think I got the idea for like the line about the boxes, the first line of the song, how many boxes does it take? I
right.
think it was like taking a shower or something. And like that popped into my head. And then within a couple of hours, pretty much had the lyrics completely done. And again, it was like I love the idea of using something that's so detailed and so specific and then kind of zooming out from there and making a bigger point about it. And I think that's what that song is.
Yeah, and I think what the most powerful line to me was the fact that you're making the decisions about the knives and different things, and those decisions are harder than the choice that was to leave. And I'm like, ouch,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
again, I don't know the circumstances, but I think the statistics sort of support this, that 70% of marriages, actually the woman is the one that sort of makes the decision to leave. Which I
Mm.
actually thought, I've actually seen that, just in the not the relationships, but in the people I've met. It's like the woman leaves most of the time, but the fact that I think a woman, when she's done, and it becomes
Mm.
kind of an easy decision, especially
Mm.
compared to like which knives you get in the silverware. I think that's why I love the fact that how you kind of tied those two things together.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's easy and it's hard. And like you said, the just all the complicated mess of emotions. And it's like, and I think probably Sorry Now is the song on the album where you get, sadness most specifically. And
Right.
then you get so all of the other, each of the other kind of emotions get their own moment in other songs.
Right. And then the fact that I think, again, not to dwell on the breakup, but that happened before COVID, right? So
Mhm.
I know a lot of relationships ended during or after COVID. Was the timing the right timing for you? And did COVID sort of amplify the sadness or the loneliness that you might have felt?
I think it definitely solidified that it was the right time. And I actually think, as lots of I'm an introvert, and I think for a lot of us introverts, COVID was like a welcome chance to retreat inward and not feel. And I think for me, having the space, it gave me the space to process and to feel okay with the decision, as opposed to if COVID hadn't happened,
Right.
gone, kind of forcing yourself to go out and live your life exactly the same way
Right.
and, and live by the same patterns and the sort of same mistakes or whatever, if you want to call it that. It was in a way, it was nice that COVID was just so different. And I was almost like, okay, I'm living a completely different life now because of the end of the relationship, but also this circumstance that the entire world finds itself in. And I think for me, that was actually it allowed me to kind of turn the page, probably more quickly than I would have otherwise.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, good for you. And I guess post divorce, like how is life for you? Is obviously you're kind of back in music now, but did you have a renewed sense of life and creativity and inspiration?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think, I mean, it's just been an endless well of ideas for, as processing all the weird emotions that you feel as you get back out there.
right.
And for me, coming back to music too has brought up a whole, different set of emotions. And so for me, yeah, it's been really inspiring. And I've been trying to approach my music career part two with a kind of a maybe a more realistic set of expectations than I did the first time around, and something that I try to, reassure myself of every single day. But like, just trying to approach it with the wisdom of, being patient and, being consistent and showing up are probably the most important things at this point. Yeah. And I think that's been really helpful for me, especially, post COVID, post relationship,
Yeah.
kind of carrying those lessons.
Well, how is it being an introvert? And then you may already be in another relationship by now, but like I know in the dating scene today, especially for people that are generally, older than 25, it's a different world now. And you kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit more through the apps and stuff. How has that been? And
Yeah.
do you have any crazy stories?
I actually don't, and I'm so thankful as an introvert that I guess I found my new relationship the old-fashioned way, which is, actually a fellow introvert, who shares a lot of the same
Oh, good.
interests, and we
Perfect.
met through music and
Oh,
through
perfect.
our connections with music and theater. And so I have never, you know, throughout the into my entire adulthood, I've never been on a dating app, and I'm probably one of the very
Oh
few.
my gosh.
Yeah.
You're a
I can
better,
imagine all the stories and the songs that must come out of that.
yeah, you're a better person for that for sure. So yeah, congrats on that. Well, that's awesome. I'm really happy for that. Well, one more song I want to talk about that's kind of I think about the breakup is, and I think you've referred to this as your most three chords in the truth song, which is called "Motorcycle and Tattoo Sleeve."
Mhm.
I think I know what you're trying to do here or trying to sort of convey, but I would love for you to tell me, and I'll tell you if I was way off or not. But yeah, "Motorcycle and Tattoo Sleeve."
Yeah.
What's the context of that?
Yeah, I would say most of it is true. This is one where I've embellished slightly, but more in the ways that I'm actually, no, the ways that I make fun of myself in that song are, 100% true. That this song actually kinda it started with a little bit of a story and a couple of interactions for me. So, with my ex-husband, we shared custody of our 2 senior dachshunds
Okay.
for quite a while
Okay.
after we split up. Actually up until just a few months ago, which sadly we lost both of them within a couple of months of each other. But we would trade them off back and forth every few weeks for quite a while, and that meant that we would meet. Kind of in the middle of our 2 houses in this really sort of rural part of Maryland called Sunshine, Maryland,
Okay.
which just sounds very magical. It's not. It's like a gas station and a one stoplight. And shortly after we split up and we were kind of trading the dogs back and forth, I noticed that all of a sudden, there was a tattoo on his arm that wasn't there for the entirety of our relationship. And then, a few months later, I noticed that there was another one, and you could just sort of see them, like, underneath his shirt sleeve. And then he sort of casually slipped it into a conversation that he'd gotten a motorcycle, and I was like, "That's interesting. Not something that I would have pegged for you, but okay." And it got me thinking, because I'd sort of heard through the grapevine that, the new person that he was dating, also had tattoos. And so you start to think about, like, the ways that when you're in a new relationship that you change yourself for that person, and, you take on new hobbies and new interests and new physical things, new purchases, like whatever it is. And I love that idea that, we all do, great things. We do silly things when you're in the throes of a new relationship. And I myself have taken on new hobbies. The line in the second verse that says, I'm practically a vegan, but my favorite food is cheese, is 100% true. My new partner was plant based, does all the cooking for us, but I cannot and will not ever give up cheese
Right.
because I love it so much. And so it was just really fun to kind of explore that topic from both sides, and then sort of land in a place of like, you know what, we're all just doing the best we can to, get through life and, be with the people that we love and care about. And if that means changing ourselves and maybe looking a little silly in the process, that's okay.
No, it's actually brilliant. I don't think anyone, and I listen to a lot of music. I don't think anyone's ever sort of addressed that whole topic in a It's a little bit of a stick it to them a little bit, but it's also a little bit fun and playful,
Yeah.
which is the right balance. But yeah, again, I never had facial hair, and not that I have a lot now, but as soon as I was single, I grew facial hair, and so and I was listening to the song. I'm like, there's probably 15 things that she could identify about me that she wouldn't recognize. And I think that's just
Yeah.
part of like life and evolving,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, and sometimes you do it intentionally, right? You wanna reject, like, "I don't wanna be that version of myself anymore. I'm gonna dress a different way. I'm
No.
gonna, listen to different music," like, whatever it is, and then sometimes it's, like, stuff you don't even know that you're doing. It was fun when I was brainstorming ideas for the 2nd verse, trying to make my list of, like, all the things that I think that I've done, and then the ones that, made the final cut. I was only able to put a couple of them in there, but, yeah, it was kind of fun to, like, turn the lens around on myself and say, like, "What we've all done this."
Yeah, no, like I said, it's brilliant. So well done on that.
Thanks.
So the collection of songs on Carnival, was there, three times this many that you sort of had to filter out, or did these 9 or 10 just come together and say, okay, this is actually an album? Like how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, because we sort of I wrote it and recorded it almost, one at a time in real time over the course of about a year and a half. There were other songs that I wrote in the meantime that have demo versions, but they just didn't feel right for this particular project. So um, I've always wanted to be the kind of writer who can like go away for a couple months and come back with like 30 songs and then be able to say, okay, these are my favorite 10 from the 30 that I've written. But I've never been that type of writer. And
Hmm.
I've always been much more, especially with my previous albums, I basically was like, okay, I want to put out an album and I want it to have 11 songs on it. And I wrote exactly 11 songs. And so
Okay.
at least I'm happy that at this point in my career, I've progressed past that to like, I had, maybe half a dozen more songs that I wrote over the course of the last year and a half that, didn't make the cut this
Right.
time around. I'm thinking, stylistically, they maybe veer in a slightly different direction. That's one of the things I've always struggled with is that I'm kind of stylistically all over the map. And
Mm.
so getting a collection of songs that can sort of hang and be coherent can sometimes be a struggle because sometimes I'll be a little bit more Americana country, sometimes a little bit more. So I have a couple songs actually that I wrote over the past year that definitely are more like either like more in the folk angle,
Mm.
which is kind of really fun to try to
Yeah.
write in that vein for me, to really put the emphasis on like very interesting, metaphorical lyrics and stuff like that. Or they veer, more into like the kind of roots country. Whereas this album, I would categorize it as like, you know, pop folk,
Right.
maybe. And even that is a stretch. Um, but yeah, so I have a few more songs that I might put out at some point
Okay.
that were written around the same time, but maybe just didn't feel like they belonged with this group.
Well, I guess back to the earlier point around what's changed. I think
Yeah.
now you probably have more. There's probably more freedom for you to release just a single here and there, or another EP. Like you're not bound to like creating a full album every time, right? That's probably one
Yeah.
thing that's changed since you last released the album.
Absolutely. Yeah, back in the day, it was the album was the model,
Right.
right? And, like, it would take a long time, and you would have to put a lot of money into it, and you get kinda your one shot every couple of years or so. And yeah, like you said, that now it's you can do an EP, you can do a single,
Yeah.
and it's so easy, from start to finish too. It's so fast to be able to produce something and, like, immediately get it up on the streaming platforms. So then it's like it feels special to be able to step back and like be really intentional when you want to do an album to go all in and make it thematic and invest in visuals and stuff like that. So I would imagine for my next one, having just gone like real big for this album, I'll probably do some, singles or something smaller and
Okay.
try to do that until I'm ready to like do the big thing again.
Okay. Well, I think so. This next question doesn't really have to do with success because I know how you measure success is for the corporate world and for music is changing and it has different
Yeah.
parameters. But where do you think you're at as an artist today, and then where do you want to be?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a really good question. I would say where I am today, I guess I probably frame that in comparison to where I was, years and years ago. And I feel really good about where I am as an artist today in terms of like now, writing for the sake of writing as opposed to writing for the sake of, oh, this is what I think a song should be and I want to have something to put out, which I think makes me feel a lot more confident in myself as a true artist with like something meaningful to say. And I think it shows in the new album. And so I'm really excited about try to continue that pattern of just like I want to, write for the sake of myself and for letting whatever feelings that I need to process, like let the music and the writing do that, which I think is a much healthier way to
Mm.
think about being an artist today instead of thinking about which, I used to think of myself in terms of, well, I want to be playing these kinds of rooms, or I want to get a record deal, or like, whatever that is. I think, and I've tried to repeat this to myself as often as possible. If you have to do it for just the actual act of doing it instead of whatever numbers of streams you're expecting to get or whatever views on whatever video, because it's just there's so much that's outside of your control. So I would say like I'm hopefully in a much healthier like mindset as
Mm.
an artist and trying to like really get myself to love the process. And I guess that probably is the answer too to where I would like to see myself is
Right.
continuing to grow into somebody who just really enjoys the process of
Mm.
being an artist and can sort of let go of all of the other stuff. Yeah, I'm definitely not there yet, but I would like to be.
I'm sure it's hard to let go of everything else. It's got to be right.
Yeah. And as a podcaster too, I know it's like you look at the numbers and you look at the listeners and stuff, and it's always what can I do to try to get this to be higher? And the answer is like there's so much that we can't control. So as long as you enjoy like doing the
Right.
thing, that's what it's all about.
No, it's great. It reminds me. I reposted something on Instagram a week or two ago about Rick Rubin, right, the famous
Yeah.
producer. He said something exactly what you just said, which is if you worry about the outcome, you're always going to be chasing some. He didn't say this, but like chasing a ghost. He's like, if you just want to make art, and if it's what you enjoy doing, and the output is what you would like, eh, that's all you can control and focus on that. And
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what you just said. And coming from him, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just read, and I know Quincy Jones, as of the day that we're recording this
Right.
interview, Quincy Jones just passed away, and I read a quote from him that, he had said to somebody offhandedly in a recording studio that was something to the effect of like, "As soon as you start worrying about the money, then God leaves the room." Or I like to the idea of like this divine inspiration, this creativity. If you start worrying about the outcomes, the success, the money, whatever, that muse leaves,
Right.
and I have to believe that.
Right. Well, again, not to belabor the point, but it goes back to the whole decision of whether you go or not go full time in music, because not having that sort of consistent, whatever revenue stream to pay bills and things. I
Yeah.
mean, that's so challenging to figure out like what the right time is.
It really is,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I have the luxury of because I worked for so
Right.
long, for me, I can take a little bit of a risk right now.
Yeah.
I have a 401k from my old job.
Yeah.
I have the little bit of padding that I wouldn't otherwise have because, like, there's really no money in music. Streaming pays a tiny, tiny bit.
Yeah.
I do a lot of live performances, but live performances of original music don't make as much money as if you're in like a big cover band and you
Sure.
can pull in lots of money from that. So it's yeah, there's not much to be had.
And none of it makes sense at all. Did you ever watch the show Ted Lasso?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Well, we could probably spend another 45 minutes dissecting that whole marriage and breakup and how he handled it and all those things, because that was pretty interesting to follow. But we won't go there just yet. But so that show sort of inspired what I'm trying to do, which is
Hmm.
sort of reinforce positivity, but also this notion of curiosity, right? I ask everybody this because I'm curious, but what are you most curious about today?
Ooh, that is such a tough question. Um, I mean, honestly, because this is the eve of the election, there's a lot of things that I'm curious about in our country and what all is going to happen for the rest of the week. It's really hard, I think, right now to like
Right.
not have that be the
Mm.
thing that I'm feeling most curious about. Um, hmm. Yeah, it kind of feels like just that because of the day that we're recording this and the time that we're living in, I think most of my curiosities have to do with the future of our country and what's going to happen over the next few days to a week.
Right. No, yeah. So for the record, we're recording literally the day before the presidential election here in
Yeah.
November of 2024. A lot is riding on the outcome of that. But it's crazy, So again, I think the theme of this conversation for a lot of it has been sort of Juliet Lloyd 15 years ago today and the gap and you working and all that. But can you imagine 15 years ago? Obviously, with every presidential election, there's curiosity around the decision and who's going to win and stuff. But it just seems more and more, it's like there's so much at stake. It just,
Yeah,
can you
for
imagine
sure.
15 years ago having some of these, worries or concerns? I don't even know where you lean or anything. It's just crazy, right? That we're at this point now where it seems like life and death.
Yes. Yeah, you look around and yeah, absolutely think about and just to think about the time frame of just 15 years ago, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it's completely different time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The political landscape's completely changed in 15 years. It's wild.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. Yeah, and I worked in an adjacent industry in DC, and you get sort of jaded by it becomes sort of normal that, and especially because I kind of worked in the media part of it as well, and there's so many different conversations that there's so many bubbles, I think is what I've learned, and the conversations that are happening in DC versus outside of DC,
mm,
and in media versus outside of media, and it's just yeah, just staggering to think about like where we are right now and how we got here. And does anybody know how we got here? Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's wild. All right, so yeah, it's November, end of the year, new albums out. I guess what can we look forward to for you the rest of this year and then into 2025?
Yeah. So I have a few more album release shows
Okay.
to celebrate the new album. So I'm playing in New York City
Mm,
in a couple of weeks. I'm doing an album release show in my hometown of Rochester, New York, where I grew up
all right.
and spent the first 20, 23, 24 years of my life in upstate New York. So that'll be a really fun one. And then I'm looking ahead. I'm putting together some tour plans
Mm,
for 2025, hoping to, be on the road for more of that year. I'm actually really I tour in typically in like a solo duo configuration.
okay.
You got to keep it lean, and
Hmm.
try not to lose a ton of money on the tour.
Right.
But this past weekend I played a couple of shows with a full band,
Mm,
just for the album release, and it's so fun to play with a bigger group. And so I'm hoping in 2025 too to do a lot more shows where I can lead, especially because you've heard the new album. Some of them, it's hard to pull off and like really do it justice just
yeah.
solo. So I'm looking forward to doing a lot more shows, with a band, some festivals and things like that. And yeah, I think just writing and thinking about what's the next release, whether it's a collection, it's a few songs, an EP, it's starting building towards the next album. I've been thinking a lot lately because you kind of get into these cycles, and earlier I was in the writing and recording cycle, and it feels like so long ago. I feel like I haven't written a song, and I have a bunch of tabs open on my computer that I can see right now looking at me that are like little bits of lyrics and ideas. But I found like the further you get away from the actual creative part of it, and the more kind of mired you are in I have to post social media content today, and you get
Right.
kind of just stuck in the like promotion cycle.
Yeah.
So lots of parts of which are really fun, like conversations like this. But the kind of the grind of like figuring out what am I going to post on social media today that's going to get somebody to want to download the album. And then I feel like I've just been in that rhythm for what feels like a really long time
Mm,
now, and I want to get back to the creative part so that you can kind of rediscover the joy of like, oh yeah, this feels good. This is what this is all about. So
awesome.
yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back to that.
All right. Well, Julia, it's
Yeah.
a pleasure meeting you. Congrats on the new album and good luck with everything.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.
How many boxes does it take to divide up a life and give one half away? So you carelessly pack, 'cause what's already broken can't break. Why does it feel like the choices of who gets the before I